During the PS1 generation, two games helped to popularize the stealth action genre. One was a long-awaited sequel to a beloved series. This was known as Metal Gear Solid. The gameplay was focused on sneaking around, engaging tactically, mixed in with a memorable story and characters. Shortly following the release of MGS, another stealth action series was about to be born. This was being made by a small studio who were looking to make their mark on the industry. Little did they know that they would help to popularize an entire genre. At the same time, this studio had experienced a large flop, but they persevered and used that failure as a means to take hold of another opportunity offered by Sony to create an exclusive on their platform. The game was aiming to focus on an action thriller setting within present day while providing stealth action gameplay. Syphon Filter was released on the PS1 and was a wonderful success for the studio, but this was only the beginning for this great series. Join me as we take a look back at Syphon Filter 2. Eidetic started their time with PlayStation with a commercial and financial failure, but this failure provided them with an opportunity. After the release of Bubsy 3D, they developed a prototype that showed off what their engine could do. At the same time, Sony was looking for developers to make games on their newly released PlayStation 1. Sony had a planning document for a game codenamed Syphon Filter. Eidetic's prototype caught the eye of the big corporation, and this resulted in Sony offering the team at Eidetic to work on their game. The developers were hungry for work, so they took the job and started the new project. This small team of 12 people intended on turning this project into a stealth action game. It would be set during present day and would involve the player hunting down terrorists and stopping global threats. The developers were inspired by GoldenEye along with Tomb Raider and used similar systems seen in those games to improve upon them and adapt them for their own vision. Along with this, combat would feature a lock-on mechanic that would allow for easy aiming and sweeping cinematic camera movements during the action. In 1999, Syphon Filter 1 was released, and this game would go on to be both a commercial and financial success. Following the release of the first game, the entire team took the week off to get some well-earned rest and relaxation. While most of the team was taking a break, two leads were hard at work drafting a script and outline for Syphon Filter 2. This was a two-person collaborative effort to essentially create a pitch for the sequel. In addition, this is where the inclusion of the Moscow sections of the game were born. While developing this draft, they focused on including exciting locations that would make for engaging gameplay sections. The goal with this was to have a screenplay built that the team could use and follow throughout the course of the development. The first game consisted of a lot of the team coming up with stuff as they went along, and this early screenplay would help to focus up the development and provide them with a clear beginning, middle, and end. When the rest of the team returned back to the office, this was the pitch for the sequel that was presented to them, and the entire studio got to work on Syphon Filter 2. From a very early stage, the goal was to build off what they had accomplished with the first game. They did not want to reinvent the wheel, but rather improve on what they had initially built for their new entry. Just like the first entry, gameplay was going to be top priority, but a good story was still part of its identity. As such, the developers wanted to enhance the storytelling areas of the game. One feature that the developers wanted to do in the first game, but were unable to, were to include cinematic-like moments that the player could be part of. These would not be cutscenes, but rather sequences that still have the player in full control, but with more attention on the presentation. One of the developers was able to script certain sequences into the game to provide these engaging moments. While developing this area, the team was a bit concerned with how players might react to these cinematic gameplay additions. This was because that through playtesting, the developers found out that the more freedom that they gave to the player, the more instances it caused the player to break the scripted sequences. Syphon Filter was praised in many areas for its freedom and approach to many of the gameplay sections, and while the developers still wanted to maintain this in the sequel, by choosing to include more of the cinematic gameplay moments, the developers needed to restrict the control of the player to ensure the sequence was executed as intended. Eidetic was taking some risks with their sequel and trying to push their game further, but there was still this level of not knowing if all of this would pay off in the end. Along with this, the team wanted to use more cutscenes to tell their story. The lead writer of the game really liked the use of them in the original and wanted to use the sequel as a means to tell more story than there was in the first game. This went along with the goal of going bigger and adding on to what they had developed in the original. The cutscenes eventually became so voluminous that the game ended up being shipped on 2 discs. When it came to specific details for the story, the writer wanted this next game to pretty much start where the first one ended. Many of the prior elements from the original story would be returning, like the mysterious agency, conspiracy groups, and weapons of mass destruction. The writer also made an effort to include exciting twists and turns within the story, along with building up to a surprise that was set up earlier in the game, and then would be a reveal later in the story. Again, the story would focus on Gabe and Leon's efforts to stop the villains, but this time Gabe was not going to be the only playable character. Leon was really well received from the original and always provided Gabe with support. Eidetic thought it would be a cool feature to have her front and center in her own levels, especially because she was just as capable and as trained as Gabe. Syphon Filter 2 was aiming to be an evolution for the franchise and provide more of a sweeping scope than they could do before. The thought process on the sequel was less about fixing elements from the first game, but rather making it bigger than the original. The story was going to take a more personal angle with Gabe Logan, along with having a constant theme of betrayal. The developers saw this sequel as a bigger playground for what they wanted to do with this franchise. During the development of Syphon Filter 1, the developers found that they wanted to keep their levels mostly at night for several reasons. By having levels at night, it allowed the team to use fog and other ways to hide the loading from the player to make the game feel bigger than it actually was. Along with this, the developers experimented with day levels and found that the game generally looked better at night and fed into the atmosphere of the story. As such, the same mentality was used in the sequel, by primarily featuring all of the levels taking place at night. Syphon Filter 1 had a reputation of being a very challenging game, so the lead gameplay designers knew this going into the second one, and made an effort to try and balance the game to maintain a good sense of challenge, while not being as punishing as the first. The developers want to explore providing a multiplayer mode within the sequel. This is something that they wanted to do, and some extra time in development was devoted to providing a 2-player deathmatch mode. In this mode, it would allow players to select between their favorite heroes and villains, along with characters who had been killed in the prior game. Many of the maps would feature arena-like sections from areas in the campaign, while also including some new stages that were completely original and specifically for the multiplayer. This entire addition to the game was like a fun experiment for the development team. In concept, they liked the idea of implementing a multiplayer of some kind, and felt that this was a nice little addition for their sequel. Also, this kind of showed where their development team's head was at, where a later entry would be very focused on multiplayer elements. While making the different levels for the sequel, Eidetic wanted to try and push what their engine could do, and continually try and provide something new to the player. Essentially keep the gameplay familiar while adding on to the experience. This resulted in some of the set-piece levels that were featured in the game. One level takes place on a moving train where Gabe is battling it out with different enemies. The developers needed to pull off some tricks to properly execute this effect. For one, the train was never moving throughout the entire level. It was only made to look like it was. This is an example of the team being creative with the limitations of the technology at the time to create something that pushes the series forward. Just like with Syphon Filter 1, this was a game that was made on a small budget. In addition to this, Syphon Filter 2 was going to be made within 1 year. The studio was being really ambitious when it came to their sequel. The improvements to the storytelling, presentation, along with the new and different levels they would provide to the player, made it seem like the developers were doing everything they could to push this series forward in a short period of time. That early screenplay very much acted as a guide to provide the team with a proper beginning and end point for the project. In many interviews, they have cited saying that during the development of the first game, they felt like they were completely flying blind. A lot of this was because the stealth action genre was not yet established, and so the team didn't really have a lot of things to draw in for inspiration for their gameplay, like a template of sorts. While elements of gameplay were inspired by games like Tomb Raider and GoldenEye, the execution of using those concepts were going to be very unique for the new stealth action IP. But now the team had a proper plan for their sequel, along with the experience, confidence, and success from the first game under their belt. Eidetic was trying to do a lot within a short period of time for this sequel. In March 2000, Syphon Filter 2 was released to the world. Syphon Filter 2 is a third-person stealth action game with a focus on sneaking around and shooting. Where levels may have been mixed between stealth and action in the first game, they are more segmented here in the sequel. There are a good amount of stealth-specific levels, which require you to play very carefully along with rewarding your patience. Many of these levels contain instant fail-like sections if you are detected. While this is a dated type of design, the stealth levels feel better constructed and improved on from the first. Along with this, the action levels provide lots of thrilling sequences, and while the sequel maintains the high level of difficulty as the first, there is a more forgiving checkpoint system here and it improves the entire experience. The controls remain mostly the same as the first. You can crouch for better accuracy and to stay hidden from enemies. The shooting is split between third person and first person. The third person shooting is done through a lock-on mechanic, and this allows for some cool camera movements as it whips around to target your next foe. If you require precision or are up against enemies with body armor, then you can go into first person view and line up a proper headshot. The first person aiming lets you use cover and lean left and right to fight more tactically. The health system is the same as the first, along with the target lock bar letting you know how likely you are to hit an enemy, and along with a danger bar indicating if an enemy will hit you. You can opt to roll to avoid damage as well. The same quality action and detail backs up the shooting. Enemies will have blood marks on their outfits as you shoot them, along with having different death animations depending on what weapon you are using. The shotgun provides some of the best impact as it pushes anyone back when you hit them. The gun sounds, impact, and feedback are all good and on par with the first game. Syphon Filter 2 is packed with different weapons to use. There are many returning favorites along with new firearms and even some non-lethal options like a stun gun. The taser makes a return as well, and it's an absolute joy to use again. The screams from your enemies provides a lot of comedy to the situations. Another thing to note is that the movement and the controls generally feel a bit smoother than they were in the first game. The general combat is a nice mix of run and gun action with more tactical elements as you peek around corners and pick enemies off safely from cover. There are some dated aspects about the design, but for the most part, the game is packed with memorable levels that are filled with moments that stay with you. This game feels handcrafted to provide a thrilling experience from start to finish, and it is in these moments where Syphon Filter 2's design shines and holds up very well. When I covered the first Syphon Filter, I praised its great first level. In this level, you had a bunch of different objectives that you could tackle many of them in whatever order you wanted to, along with having a nice amount of player discovery through its exploration. In many ways, levels from 1 would feel like this zone that had exploration and some openness to them. The sequel is very different in its approach. Syphon Filter 2 feels more restrictive in that each of the levels feel very curated to provide you with these memorable moments that are both completed through gameplay, involve some enjoyable problem solving, and are immersive areas. So while 2 will feel more like a direct experience, you still get the same feeling of satisfaction that was found in the first game's design. Now that isn't to say either that there isn't any form of exploration, as the levels like to throw in some useful hidden items. I first noticed this within the initial level. Here you paradrop into the mountains, and while it is short, I give the game a lot of credit as it lets you control Gabe as you are approaching the ground. And if you can react quick enough, you can land on a part of the mountain with a hidden weapon that will help you out. There is a nice build up to this first level where you are interacting with your men. They point you in the direction of your objective, and you can outright ignore this and decide to explore a different path to get some of the weapons a bit earlier. Once you get into the action, it's a really cool spectacle as you are engaging in shootouts with other enemies paradropping in, and if you can take them out, they will comically fall and yell out. The level is bookended with needing you to help out your allies take out some snipers, and this is where some of the dated aspects come into play, and where the player is introduced to new enemies that can kill you in one hit. The snipers are deadly and fairly cheap since many of them have body armor and require you to stop and manually aim to get a headshot. The level is also filled with enjoyable ambushes from enemies as it keeps you on your toes. This sort of works like how objectives would be added in the original, but here it's more active as enemies are set to try and catch you off guard. The first level does a solid job at introducing the player back into the action, along with having some good action beats. sequence. Like I said, the game is chock full of memorable levels and moments. There's an action sequence in a club, a prison break, and so many more. With the sequel feeling more direct and curated, it means that the developers have set up these interesting situations that you get to experience. Early on, there is a part where you have lost all of your equipment, but your ally has a weapon and can distract the enemies for a period of time. So the stakes are set and you are relatively unarmed. You need to sneak your way to the back of an enemy truck and retrieve some equipment to get back there and help out your friend. This feels ripped right out of an action sequence from a film. Now, something like this might be commonplace in today's generation, but back then this was all new and very impressive. The third level is full of moments like this. You eventually get cornered and get to use a flamethrower in a rail shooting type part, where you hold off against a bunch of foes. They all have body armor and you burn right through them. This is extra satisfying because of the overuse of these guys towards the end of the first game. This feels like a bit of payback to those last few levels. With the game wanting to essentially figure out how to accomplish these sequences in one way, that means that the freedom is limited, but there are still some moments that provide some of that freedom from the original. There is a part in the same level where you need to clear a road. You are told to remain undetected, but if you are caught, you need to contend with snipers that can kill you instantly. So there is an incentive to play the stealthy route, but you can adapt if you are caught. Something like this is very much appreciated. One of my favorite parts is where your ally will pretend to surrender to distract some guards, to allow you to grab some grenades and blow up the power, so that you both can sneak past some APCs. The entire sequence plays out like an action film, and it's moments like this that really immerses the player into the game. Yes, these sequences are very scripted to create a cinematic experience through gameplay, rather than a cutscene, which is why I think these moments hit better and really stay with the player. Plus, these are scripted situations that are not hand-holdy. The game lets you know what your objective is, but the player still needs to piece things together to accomplish their goals. And this is where the game retains that enjoyable problem solving from the original. Essentially, the levels provide you with these different set-piece dilemmas that you need to figure out how to solve to proceed. This isn't a mindless game, and it shows you how much more tactical and involved it is. Some of my favorite dilemmas are seen in the fourth mission. At the start of the level, you need to stop a commander from blowing up a bridge. If you get detected, he will blow up the bridge immediately. You also don't have any means to take him out and his guard, who is standing right next to him the entire time. This is where some of the problem solving comes into play. In the prior mission, we learned that the back of trucks could potentially provide us with supplies. So that is where I decided to go first, and I found a gas grenade that I could use to take out both the commander and his guard and prevent the bridge from blowing up. This provides a wonderful aha moment of figuring out the objectives by using something that the game taught you in a prior level and then applying it in a later level. Plus, it adds to the immersion of being a highly trained spy and acquiring new equipment on the fly to complete your goal. I love this stuff. Later in this same level is another dilemma where you need to rescue two GIs that are being guarded by two enemies. If they see you, the GIs die. If you kill one enemy, then the GIs still die. You need to kill them at the same time. Again, this is where that rewarding problem solving comes into play. The sniper rifle allows for more precision, and one guard patrols around the area and goes right in front of the other guard. But if I can line up a double headshot, then I can take both of them out. And when this works, you get this nice rush of satisfaction. Like I said, Syphon Filter 2 is full of moments like this, where the game presents an issue you need to solve and you need to figure it out like a little puzzle. Sometimes you need to be resourceful or target a specific foe, or even avoid enemies altogether, or use something in the environment to help you. But in these moments, there really is only one right answer, so there is experimentation in you figuring it out. With these curated levels, it allows the game to stay in line with the prior game, where objectives would be added as you progress throughout the mission. But now each one of these is something really memorable. It honestly felt like the developers sat down and made a list of different action movie situations that they could fit into this game. So where there was some exploration and openness in the first game, 2 is focused on providing new set-piece situations that you need to figure out, and they are just as satisfying. And these scripted events are smartly done, where the player is the one trying to figure them out, without being handheld through them, along with making the player feel smart as they complete each objective. It is a smart use of implementing player empowerment. Stealth functions similar to how it was in the first game, but with a different approach. Levels are either in one of two categories, action-focused or stealth-focused. In the stealth levels, most of these operate on an instant fail approach. If you are seen, you are sent back to the last checkpoint. Some even have interesting factors like needing to take out agency henchmen while using non-lethal attacks on GIs. This mixture of foes allows you to use different tactics. For example, your stun gun is best used for GIs, while your silenced weapons are great for henchmen. When it comes to the instant fail aspect to this, it is still really annoying and a very dated sort of design, which means I should hate these sections, yet I enjoyed many of them. Now don't get me wrong, the instant fail aspect is definitely an area I would like to see improved in a remaster. Now what makes these sections easier to handle than the instant fail sections in 1 is how the checkpoint system is much better in 2. You will receive a checkpoint after most cutscenes, which appear frequently along with completing an objective or part of an objective. This means that you will not be repeating many sections over again because of this. Syphon Filter is still really hard, but it does seem more fair in this respect with a better use of the checkpoints. The stealth also has some of the same problem solving and rewarding encounters similar to what I was talking about in the prior section. For example, there is a base that you need to sneak through, and you will come to a narrow path. There are enemies all on the left, but none on the right for a long stretch. You cannot kill any of these guys since they are GIs. So how do you proceed? You also notice that there's a truck that goes by this path as well. You can try to run alongside it on the right and use this as a means to dodge all of the soldiers. This is an example of the satisfying problem solving used within the stealth, and how the scripted sequences make you feel like a spy doing action beats from a big Hollywood movie. One of my favorite levels in the game is when you return back to the expo center from the first. This is a sneaking mission mixed with some action. I love the nostalgia of using a location from the first game, but in a different way. You will see familiar rooms along with new ones, and all of this is done in a cool sneaking suit. I do want to make note that while a lot of this game likes to employ that satisfying problem solving into its design, there are also levels that are just dedicated to the presentation of the set piece itself with great action. One of the best examples of this are the two short and sweet train levels that have you fighting on top of a train. I feel like this section does not get enough credit considering how good of a set piece this is, especially on the PS1. Just like in the first, the boss fights are pretty memorable as well. I really like the fight with Morgan. This acts like an elongated action set piece more than just a boss fight, but it's still great. Here you need to work with Teresa to defuse the bombs. Most of the level consists of you covering her while she takes care of the explosives. Towards the end, you have Morgan cornered, but you cannot kill him at first because he will activate the last bomb. So you need to keep him occupied while Teresa takes care of the bomb. Here is where you need to hide from him until Teresa gives you the go-ahead. In this short level, the action is varied and again puts you into a memorable set of events. The final boss fight in the game has some of that signature Syphon Filter problem solving. You need to defeat a guy who has full body armor, and none of your weapons can hurt him, but you do notice that there is equipment in the center of the map. Here you can acquire a shotgun, but when you shoot the boss with the shotgun, it doesn't do any damage, but it does push him back. Then you remember that the opening cutscene made a point of showing the blades of the helicopter, so you need to try and shoot him into the blades so that he dies. This is a great bit of satisfying problem solving, again making you feel like a smart super spy. The problem solving aspect to the level design is where this game remains timeless. It rides a fine line where it sets up situations that you need to complete, provides a high level of presentation, and allows the player to put two and two together. Hand-holding gameplay was not something that was common during this time, and looking back on it now, it's really refreshing as this sequel continues to treat the player like an adult, and it's better for it. The shooting, stealth, and problem solving all mix together to create what is mostly a timeless experience.
You okay, Chance?
Damn concussion grenade, my ears won't stop ringing.
Hey, are we expecting an escort?
What?
What the hell?
Get moving! They're bringing this bird down hard!
The data discs.
No time! Kowalski, grab the C4!
Yes, sir.
Grab the transponder's locator! We'll need it!
Got it.
Come on, move it! Jump! Keep moving! Go, go, go! Teresa, I'm not gonna need your landing strip after all! Coming down the hard way!
If you enjoyed the story within the first game, you're probably going to love this one even more. For one, this game seems to have double or even triple the amount of cutscenes. The plot can get a little confusing at times with the amount of exposition thrown at the player, but the story still remains very engaging. It picks up right where the first one ended. What I really liked was how this was a more personal story compared to the first. Leon is infected with the virus and she is fighting to help Gabe and find a cure. While during the first set of levels, Gabe is trying to work his way back to Leon and help find that cure. There's more attention on the characters this time around and some nice additions like Teresa, who helps bring some humor to the game. I also like how the story flips what we knew about the first on its head. In the first, we were working for a shadowy organization, and now they are the enemies in this game. So some of the mystery from the first is gone here in the story, but there are other outside players that retain that same level of mystery. The story is mostly used to get our characters into one exciting situation to the next, and there's even a nice twist that happens towards the end of the game that the player can piece together before it happens with some clues. Altogether, you get more story and it's all pretty good and pretty entertaining. When it comes to the game's flaws, a lot of it comes down to the introduction of the one-shot enemies. There are these new enemies that act as snipers that can pull off a headshot on you. I can understand using these guys a few times in the campaign at set moments, but these soldiers are intermingled into many of the action bits, and they are always annoying when they pop up. They feel extremely cheap and the game would have been a lot better with less of them. Then there are situations where there are enemies with grenades which kill you in one hit, along with some snipers. These situations feel like the developers are just laughing at the player. The snipers also feel a bit too strong as many have body armor and require that headshot. Also, while I enjoyed many of the stealth missions here, I do think that failing because an enemy spotted you is too stringent. I wish that the enemy needed to call it in or hit an alarm. Syphon Filter 2 is a hard game, and while it can be frustrating at times with some of its aged elements, it is an impressive sequel that makes for a memorable game. Before we move to the conclusion, I want to mention the soundtrack. The same composer returns again and provides a new soundtrack where almost all of the tracks are complete bliss. Here are a few tracks from the game. Syphon Filter on the PS1 is an underrated series, and Syphon Filter 2 is an outstanding sequel. The sequel is focused more on trying to provide ways to improve the game rather than reinventing itself. It retains what I loved about the first, along with having great levels filled with memorable gameplay moments. The satisfying problem solving is back and provides sequences that make the player feel smart as they try to solve each of the different dilemmas. Situations are smartly set up and allow the player to figure things out for themselves. The action is still good here, along with exciting set pieces like fighting on top of a moving train. The stealth is enjoyable as well, even with the instant fail-like design to it. Thankfully, the checkpoint system is much more forgiving than the first game, making the overall experience much more fair. The story and presentation are solid as well, with an awesome soundtrack that backs it all up. Just like with the first, there are dated aspects about the game, but there are also so many aspects that feel timeless with its design. It is truly impressive what these developers were able to do in just a year. I highly recommend Syphon Filter 2, and thank you very much for watching.